Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, August 2nd, 2022. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi arrives in Taiwan. She's the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit Taiwan in 25 years. And she went despite warnings from China to stay away from the island, an island that governs itself but is claimed by China. China immediately announcing military exercises in retaliation. Coming up, we'll get reaction from the White House and a Senate Republican, and we'll talk with a national security reporter with Foreign Policy magazine. Following President Biden's announcement Monday night that a U.S. drone strike has killed the leader of al-Qaida in Kabul, Afghanistan, some questions about whether the Taliban, which now rules Afghanistan, has violated an agreement not to provide safe haven to terrorists. In the U.S. Senate, agreement between Republicans and Democrats to move a bill to provide health care to veterans exposed to toxic burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan, a bill that was hung up over disagreements over budgeting rules. President Joe Biden still in isolation for a few more days following his COVID-19 rebound positive test. He had planned to go to Michigan today to tout the new law that promotes domestic computer chip manufacturing. Instead, he joined Governor Gretchen Whitmer virtually. Justice Department sues Idaho over its restrictive abortion law, first legal challenge from the federal government to a state law following the U.S. Supreme Court's overturning of the Roe v. Wade decision, allowing states leeway to make abortion policy. And a new Bureau of Prisons director is sworn in. We'll hear from Colette Peters and talk with a criminal justice reporter at Reason Magazine about challenges she'll be facing. An article at Reuters begins, U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi arrived in Taiwan late on Tuesday on a trip she said demonstrates American solidarity with the Chinese-claimed self-ruled island, but China condemned this first such visit in 25 years as a threat to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Our congressional delegation's visit to Taiwan honors America's unwavering commitment to supporting Taiwan's vibrant democracy, Pelosi said in a statement shortly after landing. America's solidarity with the 23 million people of Taiwan is more important today than ever as the world faces a choice between autocracy and democracy. But Chinese warplanes buzzed the line dividing the Taiwan Strait before her arrival. The Chinese military has been put on high alert and will launch what they call targeted military operations in response to the visit, according to their defense ministry. At the White House in Washington, here's John Kirby, Strategic Communications Director with the National Security Council.
As you have all seen, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, arrived in Taiwan earlier this morning, East Coast time. As we have said, the Speaker has the right to visit Taiwan. And a Speaker of the House has visited Taiwan before without incident, as have many members of Congress over the years, including this year. Now, this trip was the Speaker's decision, and Congress is an independent branch of government. You all know that. We're obviously monitoring her travel, as we always do for members of Congress, and we've taken all appropriate measures to ensure the safety of her travel throughout the region. Let me be clear. The Speaker's visit is totally consistent with our long-standing One China policy. We've been very clear that nothing has changed about our One China policy, which is guided, of course, by the Taiwan Relations Act, 3 joint U.S. PRC communiques, and the 6 assurances. We've said that we oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. We've said we do not support Taiwan independence. And we've said, as I said again yesterday, that we expect cross-strait differences to be resolved by peaceful means. And we have communicated this directly to the PRC at the highest levels, including in last week's call between President Biden and President Xi. The National Security Advisor, Secretaries of State and Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have also made this very clear to Beijing in a half a dozen recent high-level conversations. Now, we've seen a number of announcements from the PRC in just the last several hours that are, unfortunately, right in line with what we had anticipated and what we talked about yesterday. Now, there's no reason, as I said yesterday, for Beijing to turn this visit, which is consistent with long-standing U.S. policy, into some sort of crisis, or use it as a pretext to increase aggressiveness and military activity in or around the Taiwan Strait, now or beyond her travel. And again, as I made clear yesterday, before the Speaker's travel was confirmed by her, China has positioned itself to take further steps, and we expect that they will continue to react over a longer-term horizon. I couldn't give you a date certain of what that horizon looks like, but we certainly would expect them to react even beyond her trip, including announcing additional large-scale live-fire exercises. Of course, they've already started doing some of that today. Flying across the median line, we've seen press reports of them doing that today, and using economic coercion. It's exactly in line with the playbook that we anticipated and talked to you about yesterday. The United States will not seek and does not want a crisis. We are prepared to manage what Beijing chooses to do. At the same time, we will not engage in saber rattling. We will continue to operate in the seas and the skies of the Western Pacific as we have done for decades. We will continue to support Taiwan, defend a free and open Indo-Pacific, and seek to maintain communication with Beijing. We will keep doing what we are doing, which is supporting cross-strait peace and stability.
John Kirby is Director of Strategic Communications at the National Security Council at today's White House briefing. Wall Street Journal has an article. Interest in House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan appears to have overwhelmed Weibo, one of China's largest social media platforms, where there was little indication that authorities were attempting to censor discussions. On Tuesday night local time, users posted screenshots of the flight status and footage of her arrival real time. The hashtag Taiwan media reports Pelosi to arrive at 2200 hours topped the trending topics on Weibo, garnering nearly 1.3 billion views by late Tuesday, and the top 10 trending topics were entirely about her visit and the Chinese government's responses. That from Wall Street Journal. On Capitol Hill, 26 Senate Republicans putting out a joint statement, including the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. It reads, "We support Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan. For decades, members of the United States Congress, including previous speakers of the House, have traveled to Taiwan. This travel is consistent with the United States One China policy, to which we are committed. We're also committed now more than ever to all elements of the Taiwan Relations Act." Senator Roy Blunt, Republican from Missouri, reinforcing that during a news conference.
So I'm about to use 4 words in a row that I haven't used in this way before, and those 4 words are: Speaker Pelosi was right when she decided to include Taiwan on her visit to Asia, or if she'd just been going to Taiwan, that would have been right. She's the highest-ranking American to be in Taiwan in 25 years. The last person to be there at that rank was the Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, when he went 25 years ago, and he was right to send that message that we believe in democracy and we believe that the Taiwanese people have a right to that democracy. That's exactly the message that Speaker Pelosi is taking with her today. China proved in Hong Kong that there is no one country, 2 systems. If you're going to be under the control of China, you're going to be under the control of China. And for us to make the point that Taiwan is important to democracy, that Taiwan is important to our national security, that Taiwan's important to our economy, is a good point to make, and I suspect others will be following Speaker Pelosi's example.
More on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. We're joined on the phone by Jack Detsch, Pentagon and national security reporter for Foreign Policy magazine. Thank you for doing this. The build-up to this visit was intense, both sides needing to show strength but not let it get out of control. Now that Speaker Pelosi's on the ground in Taiwan, where do things stand?
Well, intense would be an understatement, Michael. I mean, this was China really crying foul in a way that we haven't really heard before. And China appears to be stepping up its act, planning sort of its most provocative military exercises in decades. These are live-fire drills that will take place within Taiwanese waters, as well as major air incursions. Already 21 Chinese aircraft flying into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, forcing Taiwanese fighter pilots into the sky and basically sort of burning out their resolve. So we're seeing much more geographically expansive exercises, military provocations from the Chinese, potential missile tests this week. than we even saw in 1996 and 1997. The major Taiwanese Straits crisis that led up to Newt Gingrich's visit 25 years ago. So this is something that the Chinese are not taking lightly, and they certainly see this as the U.S. playing brinksmanship here.
Speaker Pelosi and the delegation putting out a statement that reads in part, "Our visit is one of several congressional delegations to Taiwan, and it in no way contradicts long-standing U.S. policy guided by the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, the U.S.-China Joint Communiques, and the 6 assurances." She goes on, "The U.S. continues to oppose unilateral efforts to change the status quo." Providing some reassurance to China, but they're not accepting that. Unpack that for us. What does it all mean?
Well, they're right in a sense. I mean, this is fairly routine. Congressional delegations go to Taiwan almost all the time. You've seen a handful of congressional delegations on the island just in the past year, and you don't really see all that much anger from the Chinese other than the regular pro forma statement. I think what's unique here is, of course, the speaker is going for the first time in 25 years. China is not making a distinction between a more unofficial visit, where we usually see congressional delegations couched as, versus Pelosi, who is second in line to the presidency. They're looking at this more as an official visit and more of a creeping sense that the U.S. is stepping away from those joint communiques and the 1972 One China policy articulated under Nixon. So this is the Chinese basically kind of coaxing the U.S. into this game of chicken. They've creating this uncomfortable situation to try and see who's going to blink first. But it's certainly something that the Chinese are worried that the U.S. is going about in changing the status quo here.
We're talking with Jack Detsch from Foreign Policy Magazine. You also write in your article at foreignpolicy.com that the visit comes at a particularly sensitive time for China.
That's right. So China is in the midst of celebrating the 95th birthday of the People's Liberation Army. They're also preparing for the 20th National Party Congress in November. That's where Xi Jinping is expected to basically get his third consecutive term in office, unprecedented for a Chinese leader, as well as they're dealing with a lot of internal problems. The COVID pandemic continues to rack China. They've had an economic slowdown. And so they kind of see this visit from Pelosi as thumbing them in the face at a time when they're much more vulnerable than usual, and at a time when the U.S. just seems to be in a place where it's moving away from the one China policy. Now, of course, the White House has contradicted that, said that, despite Joe Biden going up on the podium multiple times and saying that the U.S. would defend Taiwan in contravention of one China and strategic ambiguity policies, that the Chinese are still concerned that this is just a continuing erosion of the status quo. And when Pelosi's getting cheered on in a bipartisan manner like this, they're just scared that, we could sort of see that status quo continue to be upset at a time when there's real pressure on Xi Jinping inside his party to show that nationalist flair and to work towards a reunification of China.
One more question. Although both Republicans and Democrats have been supporting this trip from Speaker Pelosi to Taiwan, there was also in public a disagreement with the White House and the U.S. military about whether this was a good idea. Is there any fallout from that?
Well, I mean, this really caused a lot of stomach pangs within the administration, it's fair to say. Inside the Defense Department, we've been told the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, basically laid out the case of some of the concerns about the trip to Pelosi and her staff. There was some consternation in the military about just the tensions that could be raised, since we're looking at the potential of these live fire drills and this really unprecedented Chinese military response. So I mean, the question is, if you get drawn into this game of chicken, is the juice really worth the squeeze? Going on a trip like this at this sensitive of a time, really raising China's anger and aggression, but potentially just over a routine congressional visit. So the question is simultaneously, why now? But people who are pushing for the visit are saying, if not now, when? If Pelosi can't go on a routine visit, are you just giving up that ground to China, letting them further incur into the waters, into the airspace, and basically turning the situation into a fait accompli? So it's a complex situation, a complex set of circumstances that the Biden administration is wrestling with as China continues to get more aggressive over Taiwan.
Jack Detsch covers the Pentagon and national security for Foreign Policy Magazine. His stories at foreignpolicy.com and on Twitter at Jack Detsch. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And now on Washington Today to that CIA drone strike that killed al-Qaida leader Ayman al-Zawahiri this past weekend. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby telling CNN that the U.S. has visual confirmation of the death on the third-floor balcony of that safe house in Kabul, Afghanistan. Following President Biden's announcement Monday night, a senior administration official had told reporters that the U.S. intelligence community had high confidence that the person killed was al-Zawahiri. Here's part of President Biden's statement to the nation from the White House Monday.
And since the United States delivered justice to bin Laden 11 years ago, Zawahiri has been a leader of al-Qaida, the leader. From hiding, he coordinated al-Qaeda's branches and all around the world, including setting priorities for providing operational guidance that call for and inspired attacks against U.S. targets. He made videos, including in recent weeks, calling for his followers to attack the United States and our allies. Now, justice has been delivered, and this terrorist leader is no more. People around the world no longer need to fear the vicious and determined killer. The United States continues to demonstrate our resolve and our capacity to defend the American people against those who seek to do us harm.
President Biden giving Monday night's speech from a balcony of the White House. You can find his full speech archived at our website, cspan.org. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan going on several Tuesday morning news programs to discuss that drone strike. And he was asked on CBS Mornings about the role the government of Afghanistan may have played in protecting the former al-Qaeda leader.
So you just confirmed that the Taliban was aware that al-Zawahiri was in Kabul. So if the Taliban continues to harbor terrorists, what is the United States prepared to do? What is President Biden prepared to do?
Well, we are communicating, as I said, directly with the Taliban about their obligations to live up to their commitments and also our capacity to hold them accountable for not living up to their commitments, because we're not obviously just going to take their word for it. We proved that this weekend by taking out al-Zawahiri. And we're prepared to take further action to ensure that Afghanistan can never again be used as a basis for attacking Americans. That may have sounded like just words a year ago, but today, it's words backed up by swift and decisive action. If there is someone plotting in Afghanistan against the United States, or if there is an al-Qaeda leader trying to inspire attacks against America and Americans, as Zawahiri was doing, we will find them and we will take them out. And we just did that. And the president has shown the wisdom, strength, and success of his policy in this action that he ordered over the weekend.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan interviewed on CBS News this morning. Mid-afternoon today, the U.S. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell with this statement to reporters.
I want to focus for a minute on the successful strike against Zawahiri. Our professionals did an extraordinary job. Congratulations to them. But I think it's also important to remember that about a year ago, we pulled out of Afghanistan. At the time, the Taliban was out of power and al-Qaeda was not around. So it is noteworthy where Zawahiri was, in Kabul. So al-Qaeda is back as a result of the Taliban being back in power. And describing the current situation in Afghanistan as success is utterly absurd. About a month ago, in fact, the administration sent a Gitmo terrorist to Kabul. We sent a Gitmo terrorist to Kabul. So, after 20 years, in fact, the Afghanistan strategy was working. The Taliban was out of power. Al-Qaeda was not around. We were not losing people in combat.
And that precipitous decision to withdraw a year ago produced the return of the conditions that were there before 9/11.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, at a news conference on Capitol Hill. New York Times writes that a statement from the Taliban condemned the American strike without specifically mentioning al-Zawahiri or al-Qaida. It is an act against the interests of Afghanistan and the region, said a spokesman for the Taliban government. Repeating such actions will damage the available opportunities. This is Washington Today. From the Hill newspaper, Senate Republicans have reached an agreement to pass legislation expanding benefits for veterans who are suffering illnesses due to toxic exposures after they blocked the bill last week and sparked outrage from the veteran community and comedian Jon Stewart. Vote on the measure expected early Tuesday evening. Republicans, says the article, have said they are not opposed to the original substance of the bill, but rather a budgetary gimmick that would designate $400 billion spent by the Department of Veterans Affairs as mandatory spending. This spending would not be subject to annual appropriations process like discretionary spending. That from the Hill. On the floor, ahead of the series of Senate votes, here's Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat from New York.
Failure to pass this bill again is not just some small disappointment, something that can be easily brushed off or disregarded. Failure to pass this bill, quite literally, for many, is a death sentence. Because every single day, every hour, every minute that they don't get the health care that they need to save their lives is just another minute lost to the diseases that are devouring them. It's another minute that they won't have to be with their loved ones, to hug their children, another minute they don't get to be with their loved ones, to kiss them goodbye, another minute that they cannot do the things they love to do. So we don't have time to wait another week, another month. We have to do this now.
Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor, speaking about this deal to have certain votes on amendments before moving to final passage on the bill. Senator Pat Toomey, Republican from Pennsylvania.
We have an exceptionally sympathetic, overwhelmingly popular group of Americans, and rightly so. They're veterans who put on the uniform, served overseas, took huge risks, and along the way were exposed to toxic chemicals that have resulted or could result in their illness. There's overwhelming consensus to provide the resources to at least cover their health care costs and provide them with disability benefits because of their service to our country. In fact, the cause is so popular that the $280 billion of new spending contemplated by this bill is completely unoffset. It's mandatory spending. It's like OCO. And there's nobody that I know of, certainly not myself, that's asking that it be offset. It's like, this is what we need to do. And people acknowledge this, and we agree on that. But that's not where the PACT Act ends. That's not all there is to the PACT Act. It also includes the old Washington trick. And the form the trick takes in this bill is a complicated change to budget rules that allows current spending, by which I mean spending that is going to happen under existing law unrelated to the PACT Act. That spending that is routine already to be basically shifted off the books, so to speak, in such a way that is designed to make it easier for future Congresses to spend a whole lot more money on completely unrelated programs.
Senator Pat Toomey, Republican from Pennsylvania, on the Senate floor. The Senate reaching agreement, Republicans and Democrats, to move forward with this veteran health care bill. 3 amendments allowed from Senator Toomey, also from Senator Rand Paul and Senator Marsha Blackburn. All 3 are Republicans. But 60 votes will be needed out of the 100 in the Senate in order to adopt the amendments. That is unlikely. Then they're on to final passage, and that also is going to need at least 60 votes to pass. You can follow it all on C-SPAN 2 television. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Here are some of the live hearings on C-SPAN radio this week. On Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, the Senate Rules and Administration Committee holds a hearing on a proposal to change the Electoral Count Act, a bill put together in the aftermath of the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. And on Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, FBI Director Christopher Wray testifies before the Senate Judiciary Committee. For more of this week's schedule information, visit our website at c-span.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. President Joe Biden continues to isolate in the White House after a COVID-19 rebound positive test. His physician, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, in his daily update writing that the president continues to feel well, though he is experiencing a bit of a return of a loose cough. He remains fever-free and in good spirits. His temperature, pulse, blood pressure, respiratory rate, and oxygen saturation remain entirely normal. His lungs are clear. Given his rebound positivity, which we reported Saturday, we continue daily monitoring. This morning, his SARS-CoV-2 antigen test remained positive. The president will continue his strict isolation measures as previously described. Well, President Biden had planned to travel to Hemlock, Michigan today to be with Governor Gretchen Whitmer celebrating the new CHIPS and Science Act, a $280 billion law aimed at increasing domestic computer chip production and funding science research. A shortage of chips has hurt Michigan's auto industry. Instead of in person, he joined virtually.
I was looking forward to visiting all of you in person, but I'm glad I could still meet you virtually. As we meet to celebrate this bill, I'm reminded of what we did more than a decade ago when we rescued the American auto industry in the wake of the Great Recession. There were those who said we shouldn't. Just let it go bankrupt. Remember that debate? It was a literal debate. Let's just let it go bankrupt. But we all in this room refused to let that happen. And it wasn't just because of an iconic industry. It was because the auto industry is the heart and soul of the nation. It was about the auto industry's legacy. It's about the future. It's about America's future. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the CHIPS and Science bill is that it sees that future for decades to come. Last week, after the bill passed, I saw a headline on the front page of the Detroit Free Press. It says, "Semiconductor vote thrills automakers." Well, I know it sure in hell thrilled me, and it thrilled everybody around this White House, and all of us. You know, the way I see this bill in Michigan is it's about chips and it's about cars. The bill has supercharged our efforts to make semiconductors here in America. And, you know, these tiny little computer chips the size of a fingertip that are building the building blocks for a modern economy, they power everything from smartphones to dishwashers to automobiles and so much more. In fact, the vehicle that the UAW makes in Michigan are used as many as 3,000 semiconductors per vehicle. And as electric vehicle sales continue to climb, there were double this year than there were last year. Automakers are going to need even more of these semiconductors.
President Biden at the White House speaking to Governor Gretchen Whitmer and other elected officials in Michigan, in Hemlock, Michigan, as the governor signed an executive order related to the semiconductor chip law. From CNBC, the political network backed by billionaire Charles Koch launched an ad blitz targeting Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to get the moderate Democrats to block a massive spending and tax package that's advancing in the Senate. The bill, known as the Inflation Reduction Act, promises to raise $739 billion in new revenue, mostly by setting a minimum corporate tax rate and making changes to Medicare drug pricing to help pay for $433 billion in climate and health initiatives. Each ad calls the bill a $739 billion tax hike that will raise prices and make American energy more expensive. Senator Manchin already on board. He negotiated the package with the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, but Senator Sinema has not said whether she'll support it, and her vote will be needed to pass it. All 50 Democrats must vote yes if all 50 Republicans vote no. And Vice President Kamala Harris, head of the Senate, will be breaking that tie. Senator Schumer asked today about Senator Sinema.
Have you spoken with Senator Sinema, and if so, has she asked for changes to this bill, or have you talked to her about changes?
Look, we're in touch with Senator Sinema. We're in touch with all of the members, and we're hopeful. I'm very hopeful we're all going to stay united and pass this bill. Yes.
It's one thing to stay united, it's another thing to stay healthy. Do you think you're going to have everybody? I mean, that's a serious problem. That's a serious problem.
Well, for instance, much as I like the in-person caucuses, all of our meetings this week have been on Zoom, and we are so far so good.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, with reporters. Joining him at this news conference, Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, chair of the Finance Committee, defending the budget reconciliation bill.
Finance Democrats are very proud of having birthed a real set of breakthrough policies. We're going to lift the curse on Medicare so that Medicare can negotiate and get a good deal for taxpayers and consumers. As Senator Schumer said, there's going to be a good dose of tax justice. These multi-billion-dollar corporations, in a lot of instances, are paying a lower tax rate than firefighters and nurses. And then, as we just made mention, this, particularly because Senator Manchin is insistent on it, this is going to pay down debt. I'm going to concentrate on climate and the deficit very briefly, though. And the emission reductions that Senator Schumer mentioned, 40% overall, 70% in the power sector, are coming about because with these policies, we are doing what has never been done before. We are rewarding, for the first time, reducing carbon emissions. We're making sure that you're no longer legislating technology by technology. So you're going to get these exciting new technologies to market more quickly. We're focused on using clean energy tax credits, and they give you 4 times their cost. They give you the value 4 times the cost of what goes into clean energy tax credits.
Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, chair of the Finance Committee, at a news conference with other Senate Democrats. At a separate news conference opposing this budget reconciliation bill, Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the minority whip.
American people have figured this out, and they understand that there is nothing to be gained for them by raising taxes on oil and gas production in this country. All that's going to do is increase their energy costs. You look at electricity costs, you look at gasoline costs, you look at food costs. None of that is going to be addressed or dealt with by big fat tax increases on companies in this country that create jobs, because we all know that's going to get passed on. And so this is an opportunity by the Democrats for them to advance an agenda, which they've been trying to get at for a long time, a green climate agenda that massively increases spending, $60 billion on environmental justice, for them to define that later, and several $billion on urban trees, and tax credits for rich people in this country if you want to buy an electric vehicle. If you're rich enough to buy an electric vehicle, an $80,000 vehicle, and you make up to $300,000 a year, you can get a tax credit to buy an EV. That is the sum total of this administration's energy policy, is more EVs, and specifically EVs for rich people. Those Americans, ordinary Americans, working families in this country who are struggling to make ends meet and putting more on their credit cards or dipping into their savings just to keep up with the extra $9,000 that is going to cost this year over last, that according to the Joint Economic Committee, for the basic necessities of life. Those people are going to be looking at this thing going, what's with these people in Washington, D.C.? We're going to do everything we can to stop this, to fight this, and to stand with the American people in support of policies that will lower the cost, that lower inflation in this country and the cost of things that they need in their daily lives.
Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, minority whip, at a news conference with other Senate Republicans, as the Senate Democratic majority says they will move this bill to passage by the end of the week. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 402, NASDAQ down 20, S&P down 27. Washington Post reports that the White House named Robert J. Fenton Jr. as coordinator of the nation's monkeypox response amid a surging epidemic that has prompted 3 states to declare health emergencies. Fenton is a regional administrator for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, where he has worked since 1996. He previously served as acting administrator of the agency, and Fenton helped oversee the Biden administration's efforts to set up coronavirus vaccination sites. That from the Washington Post. A story from NBC News. The Department of Justice filed a lawsuit Tuesday arguing that Idaho's near-total abortion ban violates federal law, the Biden administration's first litigation to protect abortion access since the Supreme Court overturned the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision in late June. In announcing the lawsuit, says NBC News, Attorney General Merrick Garland said that Idaho's ban violates federal law requiring medical providers offer emergency medical treatment. Here's the Attorney General.
Today, the Justice Department filed a lawsuit against the state of Idaho. The suit seeks to hold invalid the state's criminal prohibition on providing abortions as applied to women who are suffering medical emergencies. Under a federal law known as the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, or EMTALA, every hospital that receives Medicare funds must provide necessary stabilizing treatment to a patient who arrives at an emergency room suffering from a medical condition that could place their life or health in serious jeopardy. In some circumstances, the medical treatment necessary to stabilize the patient's condition is abortion. This may be the case, for example, when a woman is undergoing a miscarriage that threatens septic infection or hemorrhage, or is suffering from severe preeclampsia. When a hospital determines that an abortion is the medical treatment necessary to stabilize a patient's emergency medical condition, it is required by federal law to provide that treatment.
The Attorney General Merrick Garland, a news conference at the Justice Department. Idaho's abortion law set to take effect August 25th. Attorney General Garland also today swearing in a new director of the Bureau of Prisons, Colette Peters, who has been director of Oregon Department of Corrections for a decade. Reuters writes that the appointment of Peters marks the end of a tumultuous tenure for the Bureau's outgoing director, Michael Carvajal, who faced backlash from prison staff over his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Colette Peters, after being sworn in by the Attorney General, promising reform.
We know so much more about what works in corrections than we did 10 years ago when I became the director of the Oregon Department of Corrections, an agency that I'm so proud of. And we certainly know more than 30 years ago when I began my career on the front line in corrections. We now know that these Benedictine values and principles like normalcy and humanity inside our prisons and throughout the entire criminal justice system improves public safety, which for me means safer prisons, fewer victims, healthier corrections professionals, and better corrections outcomes for those in our care and custody. Our mission is twofold: to ensure safe prisons and humane and sound correctional practices so that people re-enter society as productive citizens. Our job is not to make good inmates, it is to make good neighbors. So I am so thrilled to join the BOP team and family, especially now. This is an exciting time to be a part of corrections, historically a forgotten part of the public safety system. No more. The community cares and has a voice we need to listen to, especially the difficult feedback. We have a United States Attorney General who cares. You just heard his words. Congress cares. The First Step Act is an historic focus on how we do our business, and I welcome that accountability and oversight.
A headline at Reason Magazine: Biden's new Bureau of Prisons director won't be able to run away from the agency's corruption. That article written by Reason's criminal justice reporter C.J. Ciaramella. He joins us now by phone. Thank you for being with us. You write in the article, corruption, dysfunction, and civil rights abuses have infected every level of management in the large federal agency. Explain a little bit more.
Right. So the Bureau of Prisons, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which comprises about 122 facilities and is one of the largest component in the Justice Department, has been in sort of an ongoing crisis mode for years now. It's been plagued by chronic understaffing. There have been massive guard shortages. And there have also been lots of problems with just sort of systemic corruption that includes things like retaliating against whistleblowers, civil rights abuses, shielding guards who are known sexual predators and prey on inmates from any sort of consequences, and just a litany of sort of a problem of just these bad problems within the bureaucracy. And those have steadily been trickling out and coming out in news stories for years now. Just recently, there was a bipartisan congressional investigation into chronic problems at a federal prison complex in Atlanta that found abuse, neglect, real bad security problems, and really disgusting sort of health issues with rats, bad food, medical neglect, and things like that. And it also found that prison leadership was aware of this and had been aware of it for years, and that these reports that were documenting this were readily available to the senior Bureau of Prisons leadership. Despite that, nothing has really happened, and they dragged the outgoing Bureau of Prisons director, Michael Carvajal, in to talk to him about that. And they had to subpoena. He appeared under his own will, but they originally were going to subpoena him to get him in because he wasn't complying. And he just sort of said that he wasn't aware of this, sort of kicked it back down to the lower levels of leadership. And so the whole bureaucracy and the whole agency has been in this sort of ongoing slow motion crisis for years now.
When the new director, Colette Peters, spoke today, she sounded positive, like she can bring some reform. Are you saying that she doesn't have much of a chance here?
It would take a really big culture change to do that. Colette Peters has a reputation. She is the longtime head of the Oregon Department of Corrections, and she has a reputation as a reformer and as someone who has worked to change the way things ran in Oregon. And there are some, just to be clear, there are some civil liberties groups and prisoner advocacy groups who say that reputation is not quite all it's cracked up to be, and that she hasn't always been a sterling reformer. But within the context of corrections, she is not a hard line or sort of the way that Bureau of Prisons has been run in the past. And also, a lot of the previous Bureau of Prisons directors have come up within the agency. It's pretty rare to get someone outside of the agency to run it. So that in itself is a signal that the Biden administration wants someone to shake things up and wants to try and change that culture. She will run into a lot of problems. There are, I think I said, 122 facilities. There are thousands of employees that are all under different leadership. And it is just a big cultural problem, especially when you have low morale, understaffing, and problems retaining staff. It just all sort of leads up to this inertia that makes it very hard to have effective, proactive leadership that actually improves things and responds to problems instead of just sweeping them under the rug, which is basically what's been happening in the Bureau of Prisons for years. The Associated Press also reported on a federal prison a women's prison in California, where there was women were subjected to sexual abuse, and the prison had basically allowed this permissive and toxic culture just to go along and kept it and covered it up and out of the public eye. And so that's the sort of thing that Colette Peters is going to have to deal with. And it's a very hard and very thankless job.
We're talking with Reason Magazine's CJ Ciaramella. This is an appointed position, so the Senate doesn't have a chance to vote on her. When do you think she might appear before Congress, and what would you expect out of it?
I would probably say pretty soon. The Senate has been really fed up with the leadership at the Bureau of Prisons. Carvajal has been hauled in several times. William Barr was brought in a bunch of times to testify about the Bureau of Prisons' handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Bureau of Prisons came under a lot of scrutiny for its handling of COVID-19, and that was one of the things that really sort of sunk Carvajal politically and with his relationship in the Senate. Senate Democrats were very unhappy with him, and it was also bipartisan. And part of the reason that was families, not only families but of incarcerated people, but the Bureau of Prisons unions and employees were just sort of aghast at the botched response to COVID-19. So there was political pressure from the very large federal employee unions that represent the Bureau of Prisons, and pressure from families and advocacy groups to try and do something about this. So I would say that Colette Peters will probably be appearing for Congress before too long, especially if these investigations keep uncovering problems at federal prisons like they did in Atlanta and like the Associated Press and other outlets have reported. It's basically an issue of which rock do you want to turn over, and you will find something in the Bureau of Prisons.
CJ Ciaramella covers criminal justice for Reason Magazine. Find his articles at reason.com, and on Twitter he's at CJ Ciaramella. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for listening to Washington Today. Get more top Washington stories sent to you every day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.